dead run. There are loads, and then there are dead runs. In the trucking world, a dead run is when you haul an empty trailer. It's the worst feeling in the world. You're burning fuel, putting wear on your rig, and making absolutely nothing. It's a slow bleed, a journey without purpose. But the dead run I took one January in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains taught me that an empty trailer isn't always truly empty. Sometimes it's just waiting for a passenger. My name is George, and I was in a bad spot. My independent rig was on its last legs, and a series of canceled loads had left me deep in the red. I was deadheading from North Carolina back to my home base in Ohio, a long, depressing drive through the winding, shadowed hollers of West Virginia. The fuel gauge was dropping, my bank account was empty, and a heavy, wet snow had started to fall, making the mountain roads slick and treacherous. The call that came over my CB radio was a godsend, a crackly, weak voice, barely cutting through the static. Any eastbound rig near exit 139? Got a load needs hauling, cash paid, urgent. Exit 139 was a forgotten ramp leading to a stretch of old Route 60, a road that had been bypassed by the main interstate decades ago. It was a sketchy request, but the words cash paid were a siren song I couldn't resist. I grabbed the mic. This is old George, eastbound. What's the load? Furniture, the voice said, sounding relieved. Antique, from an old estate. Just needed moved to a storage unit in Charleston. Easy work. I'll double the standard rate. In cash. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing, but the roar of my debt was louder. I took the exit. The directions led me down a series of crumbling, unlit back roads, the snow falling heavier with each turn. Finally, I arrived at a pair of massive wrought iron gates hanging open like a broken jaw. A long, dark driveway led up to a massive, dilapidated Victorian mansion, a true Gothic monstrosity that loomed out of the swirling snow like a bad dream. The place looked like it had been abandoned for a century. A single dim light burned in a downstairs window. As I pulled my empty trailer up the circular driveway, a man emerged from the shadows of the porch. He was tall and unnaturally thin, wearing a dark, old-fashioned suit that was completely inadequate for the weather. His face was pale and angular, dominated by deep-set, shadowed eyes. "You're the trucker?" he asked, his voice the same weak, crackly whisper from the radio. He didn't introduce himself. "I am." "Where's the furniture?" I asked, my hand instinctively resting on the tire iron I kept by my seat. He gestured towards a large open barn next to the house. All there, ready to be loaded. The furniture was not what I expected. It was a single, massive object covered by a heavy canvas tarp. It was long, easily 12 feet, and shaped like a large, ornate box or coffin. "It's a custom-made wardrobe," the thin man said, noticing my hesitation. "Extremely valuable. From the 1800s, it must be handled with care." It took both of us straining with every muscle to slowly winch it up a ramp and into my trailer. As we pushed it into place, I heard a faint, shifting sound from inside it, like sand or dry leaves moving. "What was that?" I asked, breathing heavily. "The wood is old. It settles," the man replied, his face expressionless. He then pulled a thick, stuffed envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to me. "Half now, half on delivery. The address for the storage unit is inside. Do not, under any circumstances, open the trailer until you arrive. The contents are sensitive to changes in temperature and light." The envelope was full of crisp $100 bills. My greed won. I locked the trailer doors, got the address, a 24-hour storage facility on the outskirts of Charleston, and didn't ask any more questions. As I pulled my rig away from the decaying mansion, I saw the thin man standing on the porch. He wasn't watching me leave. He was staring at the back of my trailer with an expression of profound, almost religious relief. The single light in the house went out, plunging the entire estate into darkness. The drive was eerie. The snowstorm had intensified, and the winding mountain roads were a nightmare. But the strangest thing was the feeling coming from my trailer. With every bump and turn, I could hear that same soft, shifting sound. Shh, like dry leaves skittering across a wooden floor. But it was more than that. I could feel a weight, not a physical weight. My truck was used to that. This was a heavy, oppressive presence, a coldness that seemed to seep through the back of my cab. I tried to distract myself with the radio, but all I could get was static. The loneliness of the road, usually a familiar companion, felt different tonight. It felt like I wasn't truly alone. The incident happened on a steep, winding downhill grade. I was riding the brakes, the truck groaning under the strain, when I saw it, a set of red brake lights appearing. Suddenly, out of the swirling snow just ahead, I slammed on my own brakes. The truck shuddered, the tires screaming on the icy asphalt. The trailer, with its heavy, mysterious cargo, jackknifed, swinging out with a terrifying momentum. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sliding sideways, the dark abyss of the mountainside filling my passenger side window. I wrestled with the wheel, counter-steering, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. With a sickening lurch, the tires caught and the rig straightened out. I had avoided going over the edge, but the trailer had slammed hard against the rock face of the mountain. I pulled over, my body trembling, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I got out to inspect the damage, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the snow. The side of the trailer was dented, a long, deep gash torn in the aluminum. But that wasn't the worst part. The rear doors had been thrown open by the impact. They were swinging freely in the wind. My instructions were clear. Do not open the trailer. But the trailer was open. My heart pounding, I walked to the back of the rig and pointed my flashlight inside. The massive wardrobe was still there, chained down. But its heavy, ornate doors, which I hadn't even realized were doors, had also been thrown open. And the inside was not empty. It wasn't a wardrobe. It was a coffin, an ancient, lead-lined casket, and lying inside it was not a body, but a pile of what looked like dry brown earth and withered, dead leaves. As I watched, a section of the dirt and leaves began to shift, to move on its own. Shh, shh. I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. What had I been hauling? I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. What had I been hauling? Then, a new sound came from the darkness of the road behind me, a slow, rhythmic scraping. I spun around, pointing my light down the road. In the distance, a figure was walking towards me. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs moving with a jerky, disjointed gait. It was the man from the mansion. "You fool," his weak, crackly voice hissed, somehow carrying over the wind. "You opened it. You let him out." "Let who out?" I yelled, my voice shaking. "The soil is just his bed. He's awake now. He's hungry." The scraping sound was closer now. Another figure was emerging from the woods on the side of the road. And another. They were all shaped like men, but they weren't men. They were shambling things, made of mud and dead branches, their forms barely holding together, and they were all moving towards my open trailer, drawn to it like moths to a flame. They are the husks, the thin man cried, pointing a trembling finger. The ones he has fed on over the years. They are drawn to his resting place, but he is not in it. I looked back at my truck. On the roof of my cab, a new figure was taking shape. It was coalescing out of the swirling snow and the darkness. A tall, gaunt form with long, grasping arms. It had no face, just a smooth, pale surface, but I could feel its ancient, malevolent attention, focused entirely on me. The thing I had been hauling, the entity in the coffin. It hadn't been in the box. The box was just its anchor, its resting place. Its spirit had been with me the whole time, a silent passenger in my cab, waiting. The crash had woken it up. Opening the doors had set it free. "He needs a new vessel to travel in," the thin man screamed, his voice filled with terror and a strange, triumphant relief. "A new driver, the pact is fulfilled. My watch is over." The creature on my roof flowed down the windshield like a nightmare made of smoke and ice. It seeped through the seams of the driver's side door. I was trapped outside my own truck. I could only watch in horror as the cab lights flickered on by themselves. The engine, which I had left running, roared to life with a new guttural hungry sound. The truck began to move. I scrambled out of its path as my own rig, my home, my livelihood pulled away from me. It drove past the thin man, who was now laughing, a high, unhinged sound that was quickly swallowed by the storm. It drove past the shambling mud and stick figures who seemed to bow their heads in reverence as it passed. The truck drove itself down the mountain road, its headlights cutting a path through the snow, and vanished into the blizzard. I was left alone on the dark, icy road, miles from anywhere, with no truck, no money, and no explanation. The police found me the next morning, wandering the road, suffering from hypothermia and shock. I told them my truck had been stolen. They didn't believe me. Who would steal an 18-wheeler in the middle of a blizzard in the most remote part of West Virginia? They never found my rig. It was as if it had vanished from the face of the earth. The mansion I described didn't exist, they said. The road I led them to was a dead end, washed out for years. I was charged with insurance fraud. I lost my license, my career, everything. I work in a gas station now, just off the interstate. I'm an old man, and people think I'm crazy. I spend my nights watching the trucks roll by, their headlights like a steady stream of stars. But every now and then, late at night, when a winter storm is brewing, a trucker will come in, his face pale, his hands shaking. He'll talk about a ghost rig he saw on the mountain passes, an old truck driving itself, hauling an empty trailer. And sometimes he'll say he heard a voice on his CB, a weak, crackly voice, offering a cash-paid job for a simple delivery. And when I hear that, I just pour him a cup of coffee and I look out at the dark, winding roads, and I know that my truck is still out there, and it's still running dead. It's just looking for a new passenger. The tenant in the static. My name is Alex, and I'm what they call a digital nomad. For the past 2 years, my entire life has fit into a backpack and a laptop case. I write travel articles for online magazines, the kind of fluffy, aspirational content that shows a 20-something laughing with a coconut drink on a beach in Thailand. The reality is far less glamorous. It's mostly cheap hostels, spotty Wi-Fi, and a constant, low-grade loneliness that you learn to mistake for freedom. This winter, I decided to do something different. I was burned out on hostels and noisy cities. I craved silence. I found a listing on a long-term rental site for a small, isolated cabin in rural Vermont. The pictures showed a cozy, rustic little place. surrounded by snow-covered pines. The description was simple: quiet retreat, long-term tenants preferred, utilities included, no internet. The no internet part should have been a deal breaker for someone in my line of work, but the thought of being truly disconnected was intoxicating. I could use my phone as a hotspot for work and spend the rest of the time reading, writing for myself, and just being quiet. The rent was suspiciously cheap. I booked it for 3 months. The cabin was even more isolated than the pictures suggested. It was at the end of a long, unpaved road, nestled deep in the Green Mountains. The silence was absolute, a heavy, sound-absorbing blanket of snow. Inside, it was rustic but clean. There was a stone fireplace, a comfortable bed, and a small, functional kitchen. The only piece of technology was an old, tube-style television from the 1980s, complete with rabbit ear antennas. For the first week, it was paradise. The silence was a balm to my frayed nerves. I wrote more in that first week than I had in the previous 3 months. At night, I'd build a fire and watch the snow fall outside the large picture window. The strangeness started with the television. I had turned it on one night out of pure curiosity, not expecting it to get any signal. As I expected, every channel was a blizzard of black and white static, but I left it on. The soft, random shushing sound, a comforting form of white noise in the otherwise total silence. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep in front of the fire, I heard a voice cut through the static. It was just a fragment, a woman's voice, soft and clear, always leaves the door. Then it was gone, swallowed by the hiss. I sat up, my heart beating a little faster. I told myself it was just a stray signal, a radio wave bouncing off the atmosphere from 100 miles away. But it happened again the next night. This time, it was a man's voice, laced with frustration. Can't find the key? Then, just static. These weren't broadcasts. They were too short, too personal. They felt like stray thoughts, captured and replayed by the static. My journalist's curiosity got the better of me. I started leaving the television on every night, sometimes with a digital audio recorder running, hoping to catch more fragments. I began to piece together a story. The voices were always the same man and woman. They seemed to be arguing or searching for something. He said he would be back. The woman's voice would whisper, "The lock is new." The old one wouldn't, the man would mutter. It became my obsession. I felt like an archaeologist uncovering the fossilized remains of a long-dead conversation. I started to feel like I knew these people. They were the previous tenants, I imagined. A couple who had lived here, whose emotional energy had somehow been imprinted on the place. The real shift happened during a heavy snowstorm. The wind howled outside, and the cabin groaned under the weight of the fresh snow. The static on the television seemed louder, more agitated. The voices were no longer fragmented. For the first time, I heard a full, coherent conversation. "He's here," the woman's voice whispered, filled with a new urgency. "I know," the man replied. "He's in the quiet. He's listening. He always listens. Does he know? Not yet, but he will." The house is waking up. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside crawled up my spine. They were talking about me. I reached over and shut the television off. The sudden silence was deafening. I sat there in the dark, my mind racing. This wasn't just an echo. It was an awareness. They knew I was here. That night, the phenomena moved beyond the television. I was lying in bed when I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the walls. Not the sound of a mouse. It was the sound of a fingernail, slowly, deliberately, drawing a line on the inside of the drywall. It moved from one corner of the room, up the wall, across the ceiling, and down the other side, a slow, meticulous tracing of the room's perimeter. I didn't sleep. The next day, I decided I'd had enough. The romantic isolation had turned into a paranoid nightmare. I packed my bags, ready to forfeit my rent and drive back to civilization. As I was about to leave, I did a final sweep of the cabin. In the back of a dusty closet, tucked under a loose floorboard, I found an old, leather-bound diary. The diary belonged to a man named Arthur, the owner of the cabin, and the entries were from the 1980s. What I read turned my fear into stark, cold horror. Arthur had not built the cabin. He had bought the land with the cabin already on it. He wrote about the strange silence of the place and the old television he could never get to work. Then he wrote about the couple, a young man and woman who had rented the cabin for the winter. They were writers seeking solitude. Arthur wrote about how they became increasingly reclusive, refusing to come into town for supplies. He had gotten worried and had driven out to check on them during a bad storm. The cabin was empty. The door was unlocked. There were no footprints in the snow. They had simply vanished. But the most terrifying part was Arthur's own discovery. He believed the cabin, the land itself, was a kind of trap, a place that preyed on silence and solitude. He theorized that some places in the world were thin, where the barrier between our reality and something else was weak. He believed this cabin was one of those places. His theory was that the silence acted as a vacuum, and that something from the other side was drawn to it. A tenant, a Djinn, a spirit, a being he had no name for. He believed this entity was formless and could only manifest by borrowing from the minds of those who lived there. It didn't have a voice of its own, so it used the echoes of past conversations. It didn't have a body, so it used the house itself, scratching at the walls, testing its boundaries. The couple, he wrote, had gotten too quiet. They had listened too closely, and the entity had tuned itself to them. They hadn't vanished. They had been archived. Their consciousness had been absorbed, becoming the new permanent voices in the static, the new lure for the next quiet soul. They were the bait in the trap. The final entry in the diary was a single frantic line. I have to get rid of the television. It's not a receiver. It's an antenna. It's calling to it. I dropped the diary. I looked at the old tube television in the corner of the room. It was unplugged, its screen a dark, dusty mirror. But as I stared at my own reflection in the glass, I saw another face superimposed over mine. A pale, gaunt face with eyes that were black, empty pits of static. And from behind me, from the unplugged, dead television, a new voice whispered, crystal clear in the silent room. It was not the man or the woman. It was a dry, ancient, rustling sound, a voice made of pure static. Found you. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat. I ran. I burst out of the cabin and into the freezing air, not even stopping to close the door. I scrambled into my car, my fingers fumbling with the keys. As the engine roared to life, I looked back at the cabin. A figure was standing in the doorway. It was tall and indistinct, a shimmering silhouette of television static, a human-shaped hole in the reality of the world. It raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a gesture of acknowledgement, of ownership. I drove. I didn't stop until I hit the interstate, until the comforting noise of other cars and trucks surrounded me. I live in a city now, a loud, chaotic, wonderful city, My apartment is on a busy street, and I never, ever turn the television off. The constant noise of sitcoms, commercials, and cable news is the only thing that keeps the silence at bay. But sometimes, late at night, when a show cuts to a commercial and there's a brief half-second of dead air before the next ad starts, I hear it. A faint, familiar hiss. The sound of static. And I know the tenant is still there in the quiet spaces. And it's listening. It's always listening. And it's waiting for me to get quiet again.